and welcome along to the VMTV Rugby Pod. It's great to be back, and what a couple of months we have in front of us. World Cup in France. With me as always, the two amigos in Matt Williams, and in studio for once, Alan Quinlan. Alan, how has your summer been?
Very good, yeah. Obviously the 20s, I was doing a lot of stuff for that in end of June, start of July. Ireland unfortunately came up a little bit short there, but it was a great tournament, and it was great to see some great young players coming through. And other than that, a little bit of rest and relaxation, and we're back into mad rugby time coming up now, which is the pinnacle for all these players. 4 years has flown by. It was like yesterday I was in Japan, but France kicks off the week after next, and it's exciting.
Certainly does. And Matt, how's Narbonne and how's the sunshine?
Mate, too good. Had a great summer, mate. Lovely summer. Still a bit of rugby on. Watched the championship and all the rugby from the south. But I agree with Alan. I can't believe it's 4 years since we were doing the last World Cup in Japan. But this one's going to be even better, I think. This is the most even World Cup I've ever witnessed. I've seen them all. I certainly believe this is the most even and the hardest to pick who's going to come out lifting the William Webb Ellis Trophy. So, yeah, like Alan, I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, before we get into the nuts and bolts, let's hear from Andy Farrell, who did pick the squad just a couple of days ago, the 33-man squad to go to France.
Well, it's obviously difficult because you're shattering someone's dream, but at the same time, I would hope that through all campaigns that you don't let bad news be a shock, as in you're constantly giving feedback to them to let them know where they're at, and players are not stupid. They've always got a sense of what's happening along the way. But what I would say is that the reason it is difficult for myself to certainly tell those 5 players the other day is because they made it very easy for myself. They're understanding. They're all team players. There's no selfishness whatsoever within all of the group. And if you have a look at everyone else announcing their squad so early, the reason that sometimes that happens is because they want to get to the 33, and they want to make sure that they push everyone else on so that there's no disruptions along the way. We have none of that ever because of the quality of people that we've got. They're team first people, and that's why it's hard to shatter the dreams, really.
And you hear they're team first people, but he must have had sleepless nights about that. The 33, 18 forwards, 15 backs. If we look at the ins and outs, Keith Earls in, McCluskey in, Stockdale, Prendergast out, Kieran Frawley and Tom Stewart. As an assessment, 33, what do you make of it?
Well, if you asked me to pick this squad 3 months ago, I probably could have went pretty close. Most people would have went pretty close to the 33-man squad. So there's no big surprises in there. There's no kind of shocks. And that's credit to what Andy Farrell, Mike Catt, Paul O'Connell, Simon Easterby and John Fogarty have done in the last 2 to 3 years. We had a kind of a shaky period, obviously during the World Cup in 2019. Bit of uncertainty after when Andy Farrell took over. A lot of questions about the attack, the shape of the team. They found a little bit of spark and cohesion. And I think it was the England game in 21, was it, or 20? In 21 maybe, in the Aviva, where they had a very convincing, important win. Keith Earl scores a try, Jack Conan scores a try.
COVID, yeah, you're right.
And that was the start of a kind of a energetic, positive, I suppose, run as regards the attack. There was a lot of questions about the attack. So they've had a really good build-up and a transition. He's capped a lot of players in the last couple of years. And it's a good environment. And, he's talking there about, players buying into the team and being team first. I think that comes down to the coaching as well, and creating a good environment, good leadership. Doesn't guarantee you anything, but I think he's managed the group really well. And going right back to, in recent times, they've won a Grand Slam. They were in New Zealand last year. So they're in a good place, a good position, and the build-up has been really good. I think there's possibly a little bit being held back, and most people would agree that, they're a necessity, these World Cup warm-up games, but people can be a little bit different, and they can be holding back a little bit, and they would just want to get through them. So, whether you're a seasoned international experience or someone who is their first World Cup, there's great excitement to hear your name being called out, and it should be a wonderful tournament. But I go back and say it, Andy Farrell is doing a great job, and the players seem to trust him, and he has a real good rapport with the players. He's quite calm and relaxed, and he's continuously wanting them to be challenged. So there's no surprises in the squad. I think it's difficult. I think someone like Kieran Frawley, with his utility ability of 10, 12, full-back, he's a real good footballer. He didn't really get much of a chance here. Gavin Coombs, for me, a little bit disappointing that he didn't get a run in there. But it's understandable in a way, because if you look at the back rowers, Jack Conan, Caelan Doris, Peter O'Mahony, Josh van der Fleer, world class, and they've delivered at a very high level in recent times. Ryan Baird is a kind of a freakish athlete who can do something special. He can find a moment in a game, so he's in there. So I think someone asked me last week, should Gavin Coombs feel really upset, or has he been hard done by? It's the quality that's in front of him. I've experienced that myself in my career. Grand Slam on 09, I tugged out for every match in the Six Nations, but I looked at the players who were ahead of me: David Wallace, Stephen Ferris, Jamie Heaslip, Dennis Leamy, and it's hard to bang at the coach's door and say, well,
still hurts you, Quinny. It still hurt you.
No, but it's hard to bang at the coach's door and say, I'm better than one of these guys, I should be ahead of him, So that's the unfortunate thing for Gavin Coombs. Cian Prendergast, we thought he might, given he started against England, and Tom Stewart, again, he's behind Sheehan Keller, and Rob Herring has been a real solid rock for Ireland when he's had to step in there as well and come off the bench. So Jacob Stockdale, I suppose there was a debate going on about Earls or himself who'd go, and it's obviously disappointing for Jacob, given where he was a couple of years ago. It's hard to believe how potent he was and how excited people were about him, and he doesn't go to a World Cup. It's incredibly disappointing. But Stuart McCluskey is obviously the winner in the centre. They could have went three centres there, because I think some of the back three could have slotted in Jimmy O'Brien, Earls, even Mac Hansen could play in the centre if he needed. But there's no surprises in there. There's no bolters. I know we're going to talk about Cian Healy. He's a loss. He's experience, he's strength, he's power, but it's a very settled squad, and let's hope they perform.
It is a settled squad, Matt. If we bring you in there as a former coach, Andy Farrell, Alan mentioned there, always seems relaxed in a very good manner, but that's a difficult job, to say the obvious. That is what he's paid to do. But as a former coach, ringing up players not to make in Six Nations squad, for your example, like, what's it like? Those conversations can't be easy.
I know they're horrible conversations. Exactly what Andy said. You're smashing someone's dream, and it's awful. It's interesting that I've met a group of guys I used to coach in Australia, and a couple of them, I gave every one of them a start, and they all said, "Oh, you dropped me for this game, or you dropped me for that game," and I said, "Well, but I gave you your first game." Players don't remember the opportunities you give them; they remember the opportunities you deny them. But that's the gig. Your responsibility, Andy's responsibility, is to the jersey, not to the individual. His job is to be loyal to the jersey, to do what's best for the jersey at your own personal expense, and at the expense of individuals within the team, as Andy said. The great Jimmy Telfer said to me once that being a national coach is one of the loneliest jobs in the world because of those sort of things. And Jimmy was right. When you're selecting and when you're dropping players, it is incredibly hard because quite often you really like the guy. You admire them and you respect them, but you still have to do what's right for the team. So every coach that's always done that since coaches were selectors. That's why they used to have a selection committee. I believe the best selection committee was a committee of 3 where 2 were dead. But, that's what you used to have, a committee. And the coach used to have to then wear what the committee said, even though he didn't believe it. So it is tough. But look, I think I agree with Quinny that you could have picked that side 3 months ago, with the exception of Healy, which is obviously a very, very sad thing for Keane, who's been a great servant of the game, and a great servant of Irish rugby. But that's a very, very good squad. And the quality of the squad has been made through decisions that Farrell's made, by putting in the series against the New Zealand Maori, by taking a team to South Africa, and obviously bringing New Zealand A team up to. He's created that depth, given opportunities, so that the players like Williams and Prendergast, that's what he can come in and he'll wait for them stepping in. So I Farrell's done this job in that with Quinny, and I also think that isn't there is almost no arguments that anyone could bring up for the people that have been selected, which again is a reflection of the quality of Irish rugby and the quality of Farrell's staff.
We both touched on there, Kane Healy. He's come back before pretty quickly. This one seems just a wee bit too far for him, but to be denied a 4th World Cup, absolutely gut-wrenching for him.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It's heartbreaking. We saw some high-profile ones over the years. David Wallace, Jordan Murphy, Tommy O'Donnell in 15 dislocated his hip in Cardiff in a warm-up game. It's heartbreaking, and it's just the nature of you worry before these games, is you're going to pick up a situation like this, and it's really difficult for him. I think back to Cian Healy in his career. I played with him. I remember him kind of.
He's not that old, is he?
He was very young when he was in the Irish squad. I'll put it that way. We won't go the other way. But in 2007, when the World Cup squad was announced for France, he was training with us. Look, he probably knew at that time, and most people knew, that he wasn't going to be picked in that squad. But I remember him right back then in 2007. So he's around a long time. He's so tenacious. And 2013, going with the Lions to Australia, I think best loose head in the world. He probably was at that level for a number of years. Winning Heineken Cups with Leinster, starring for Ireland, getting over the 100 cap mark. He's been very unlucky with some bad injuries. He had a bad neck injury in, I think, 2015 as well, 15-16.
He's always seemed to come back stronger.
He's recovered, and he recovered miraculously last year in New Zealand, where he picked up an injury early in the tour and came back and was involved for the test matches off the bench, and really important for Ireland. So it's really unfortunate. The worry was, I think, if Cian Healy goes over in the ankle and strains the ligaments, I think he has that miraculous ability to, recover really quickly. But if you tear a calf, and he looked under a lot of pressure coming off the field, so it's a big loss. It's Jeremy Loughman comes in, and I think Jeremy Loughman did really well for Munster in the second half of the season. Dave Kilcoyne has been out for a couple of weeks, so they're very good players. But I think what you get with Cian Healy is that power and that physical strength, particularly if you've one big scrum against South Africa, New Zealand, France, whoever it may be, Scotland, 5 metres out, whether you're going for a push and trying to force a penalty, or else you're defending your line. You'd have a lot of trust in Cian Healy to get the job done there. I think Jeremy Loughman and Dave Kilcoyne, they've got to prove themselves now and make sure they get it right. And you know what? Loughman did it against the Stormers on a couple of occasions, and at the end of the season he was pretty solid. They were put under savage pressure, and so he's a very good player as well, as is Dave Kilcoyne. So they've got to step up now, and it's an opportunity for both those guys. Obviously, we Andrew Porter will be the starting loosehead. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But by and large, I'm sure Matt will agree, if you were given the situation that one player might miss out from the warm-ups, you'd nearly take that, as opposed to kind of going, some teams could have lost a couple of players here. And so by and large, it's been it's been pretty decent. We need to see Sheehan and Kelleher back, because they're really, really important to this team.
Matt, Quinny touched on the warm-ups there. It looks to be just one player injured, which is a great ratio, particularly in the pass record for Ireland. But what have you made, the wins against Italy and England, and then we're just touching off there about the win in Bayonne against Samoa? Pretty ugly, but it was wet. Would you read much into these games, Matt, or totally not irrelevant, but do you think it's just sort of get them done, get the wins and move on?
I think that's a fair summation, Stu. Like, if you look back over the years, it's pretty much that you need the games, the players need the games, the teams need the games. But in some ways, it's exactly what Alan said. These are human beings. They're going in there thinking, I'm maybe 80 minutes away from going to a World Cup. So the Bayonne game, all the players knew before the game they were going or they weren't going. They'd already been told by Andy Farrell, which I thought was very interesting strategy from him, putting them under pressure, seeing how they perform. But then they saw Healy, the injury, calf injury, which, with great respect to Keane, calf injuries, we call them old man injuries, because older players are very susceptible to calves, and they are very, very finicky, very hard to get right. And when they saw that, everyone must have just thought, wow, enter Mac, I just want to get to the end of this. And they're human, and that's totally understandable. I remember against you, I don't put a lot on the warm-up games. 2003 World Cup, Alan Quinlan will remember it very well, scoring a great try in Adelaide. Unfortunately hurt himself there. Same World Cup, Ireland are knocked out. I've got a lot of the Leinster players out on a boat on Sydney Harbour on semi-final day. Most beautiful day, a classic Sydney day, sun shining, we're having beers, having wine. England are playing France at the Olympic Stadium that night. France are going to win that game. I saw France play England at Twickenham in a warm-up game. France are going to win that game. Out in the distance, a few clouds. Giant storm comes through. Giant storm. Hit Sydney, 7:30 kickoff time. Pours rain. Wilkinson kicks England to the World Cup final. France are knocked out. The point I'm getting at is, once you're in a World Cup, that's when it starts, and you need everything to go your way. You need every bounce of the ball, every piece of the rugby god smiling at you going your way. And France didn't have that day. England did. England did at that World Cup. Australia won 2 World Cups. Every bounce went their way in those 2 World Cups. So, to me, the warm-up games are simply a dot that ends the preparation. Now you've got a week's break. Everyone's going to be in the World Cup. It starts, and it's the exceptionally even World Cup, the most even World Cup I've ever seen. So this is now the starting point. There's some discussions about selections and so on that we can have, but in many ways it's all irrelevant. It's all about what happens in the future. And even with France losing Antomac, that's over. How France going to deal with it? We saw them deal with Australia, a very poor Australia, it has to be said. They saw them deal with Australia very well. So now is the beginning. It's where we all can get in to the pool games. The Festival of Rugby starts, which is the pool stages. But here's the interesting part of what we're going to see, Stu. Very rarely in World Cup history does the first game have a bearing on the tournament. The first game of this World Cup, France versus New Zealand at the Stade de France, will have a bearing on the outcome of the World Cup. And that's a pretty amazing statistic, because I don't think there's been any World Cup where the opening match has been anything but just a game that's kicked the thing off. This one is a monumental game, as is South Africa versus Scotland, a monumental game for the Irish direction through the World Cup. So yeah, to me they're over. Let's get on with it. But it's going to be a monumental World Cup where no one can say with any certainty who's going to lift the William Webb Ellis Trophy, which I think is it's great for us because we're going to watch it. We're going to watch it and enjoy it, and be as excited and as informed as the viewers watching every match.
Yeah, you say no one can pick a winner, Quinn, already. It is so even, as Matt says, in my opinion as well. I'm sure you agree, but if we look at the World Cup group for Ireland, we've known for a while Romania, Tonga, Scotland and South Africa. You'd it's going to be come down to those two matches, you would have thought of Scotland and South Africa. Just, I suppose, as a summary, you know, if you were to pick out straight away, you know, it's a big question, but where do you think Ireland finish in that group?
Well, on the evidence of if you go on what we saw at the weekend, they finished second in the group because South Africa, you know, what they did on Friday night in Twickenham would scare a lot of people. I think their preparations seemed to have gone very, very well. They look really connected in everything they're doing. Their set piece is obviously one of their big strengths, but you know, their line out and scrum, rock solid, and I think they have a great spark and some, you know, wonderful players out wide as well if they need to use them. So the power they kind of showed the other night, and obviously they brought 7 forwards off the bench, which is a very debatable situation. The laws allow it, of course. I don't know if we'll see them do that in the pool stage. You'd never know, but Philly LaRue pulled out late and they were going 6-2 and then they end up going 7-1. They looked scaringly powerful on Friday night. I think that the Irish team that obviously played against Samoa, if you look at the side that went out in that game, there's unless something changes, Caelan Doris, Josh van der Fleer, Tyg Byrne and Mac Hansen are the 4 definite starters. I think you could add Robbie Henshaw into that as well. He played 13 the other night. So there's probably 5 players. So there's 10 guys there who won't start in the South African game, in the Scotland game, unless something changes. So the weather was horrendous in Bayonne, really difficult to play. And one concern for me would be that type of weather. Ireland have gone so much attack and keeping the ball alive, trying to get the multi-phase in the last 2 years that I hope we just don't forget our kicking game and being pragmatic and direct in bad conditions. And I think Conor Murray did that brilliantly in the second half. He had a really good game, not just with his kicking, but his tackling as well. He looked very kind of fit and in great shape. And you could get that. Matt is talking about the conditions. They can change. You know, you could get a thunderstorm in the south of France or in France at any stage. So Ireland have got to be ready for that. So, yeah, if you're picking someone to win it, France being at home, South Africa, what we've seen of them, of course Ireland are in the mix. But, you know, it's been well documented. If Ireland get out of the group, they're playing New Zealand or France, and that's not writing Scotland off, because I think they'll make it really difficult for both South Africa and Ireland, and there's no guarantees there for either side. Scotland can be very dangerous, but if Ireland make it, you know, you're looking at flick of a coin, kind of 50-50 scenario. France will gain and get incredible momentum from being at home, but South Africa are in great shape. I think that's one thing that I would say about them. They look battle hardened and ready, and a little bit different for Northern Hemisphere because it's the start of the season. A lot of the Southern Hemisphere guys would have played. I'm not saying all of them, because you nearly have to go through every player. They have a lot of players in Japan, the South Africans, the New Zealanders. How much NPC did they play? Super Rugby, you know, that's over a while. So it's a different time of the year. So it's just who gets it right and finds the spark. I'm confident that Ireland will hit the ground running and be in good shape. But, you know, if you were to ask me to kind of grade them, and I would say you're splitting hairs, but South Africa, France, and Ireland and New Zealand probably sit in third place, somewhere like that. If I was, you know, asking me who's going to win it.
Matt, I know you're itching to come in there, and I think you've already spoke this week about the 7 forwards and 1 back incident from the bench. You know, it's within the rules that Razzie and Jack Nainabar are using. I don't want you to kick off fully here, Matt, but you were saying that there needs to be a change there, do you believe?
Matt, if I could say kick off fully, it's been a while since you've been trending on social media channels, so kick off fully, go for it.
Mate, you know me, mate. I only have 2 speeds, play out and stop, mate. There's no third gear. There's no third gear.
Just teeing you up there, Matt, you know.
Mate, look, just so everyone knows, the bench was put in place as, in the old days you had 15, if you got injured, bad luck. right? Then they put a bench in. But what teams ended up doing was they might play, say, Allen's on the bench as a back rower and a prop got hurt. They were putting back rowers into the front row and guys were getting hurt. So this whole bench issue was a safety issue. It's the same with the back three, same with scrum halves, getting tackled, at the breakdown, getting hurt. This was a safety issue to have a bench. And what South Africa have done is abused player safety issue and put a whole pack on the bench. And it's against the spirit of the game, and it's against those safety rules. Now, World Rugby should have seen this coming because for years, teams, not just South Africa, France as well, been picking a 6-2 bench, and it should never have been allowed to get to this. All World Rugby had to say was 3 of your bench have to be recognised backs. That's all they had to do, and this problem would not be there. What South Africa did the other day, I think, is totally against the spirit of the game, and certainly totally against player safety, right? So I just am totally against this, and I think I would hope, and I don't believe this will happen, World Rugby should act in the next week and say, during the World Cup, you need 3 recognised backs on your bench. Problem over. But the fact that they haven't, South Africa are not breaking any laws, but it is a blight on the game that needs to be stopped right now, because what's going to happen is exactly what happened on Saturday. The outside backs, they should have bought tickets in the stand because they were just spectators. South Africa played the game between their forwards and their scrum half. There was, they've got quality backs. This is not a problem. They've got quality players right across their team, but it is not the way the game should be played, nor is it in the spirit of the game. So that's the first part. The second part of that is they are opening themselves up to karma. And believe me, there is karma in rugby. Karma means if you only got 1 back on your bench and you get two injuries or a sin bin or a send-off, you're in serious trouble. So the Africans are rolling the dice. And we all know when karma comes into play, or Murphy's Law is another way of putting it, what can go wrong will go wrong. Now, it went wrong for New Zealand. They got sin bins to 2 forwards and then another sin bin to Barrett, which converted into a red card. So for the best part of 50 minutes, the New Zealanders only had 7 forwards on the field. And for one period, they only had 6 when the first try was scored by Khaleesi. So we've got to be a little bit careful here, in saying the South Africans are that far ahead. I agree with Quinny. They are incredibly powerful, but they do have a weakness. And if you can put them under pressure, those weaknesses will come out. They're like Australia, really unusual. They're only going with 1 recognised out half, which is Living. Now, he can be brilliant and he can be also very flaky, especially in defence. So I'm not quite with Alan that they played exceptionally well. Don't get me wrong, they played exceptionally well at Twickenham the other night. That's not the issue. They didn't play well in Christchurch against New Zealand, and they were scratchy against the Argentinians at Ellis Park. So that there is still question marks there. There's you can never write South Africa off in any way. That they're a great nation. They know how to win World Cups, and they're going to be there or thereabouts. The interesting part of this, and it's not trying to be controversial, it's just a fact. We're talking about Andy Farrell's selection. When Ireland plays South Africa, they'll know their fate. They'll know if we beat South Africa, we'll face New Zealand or France. If we lose to South Africa, we'll face New Zealand or France. That's a really interesting dilemma to be in. Now, you can never go in as a national coach and say we're going to lose this game. But it could be more important to beat Scotland than to beat South Africa. So that's going to be a real selection dilemma, how they approach that game. And the South Africans could well be in the same boat. So the selections for both sides for that particular fixture are going to be interesting. Now, you'd have to say the pressure will be just to pick your best team. But it may be players who got injuries or carrying a niggle. They might say, well, we won't risk them for this game because everything will rest on that Scotland game. Now, there's also a 13-day break between South Africa and when Ireland plays South Africa and when they play Scotland. So there's a lot riding on those 2 games for a number of teams, remembering that South Africa played Scotland in the first round, so we'll know a bit more then as well, which South Africa we expect to win. But that whole, how do we put it, conundrum of who's going to end up where out of that pool and the New Zealand-France pool, that is going to be fascinating to watch, especially around that Ireland South Africa match, how they go. Do I expect South Africa to pick a lot of forwards on their bench? Definitely a 6-2 split, yes. Should a 6-2 split be outlawed? Absolutely, it should be outlawed. It should always be forced to have 3 backs on your bench, because the game was not meant to be. We want forwards to be fatigued, right? Not to be like linemen in American football where you get 3 minutes rest and you can be substituted on off. That's not what the game was. It's the ultimate team sport, rugby. And in my opinion, you should be allowed to make substitutions at half-time or at the 60-minute mark. But those substitutions should be limited to an extent. Doing what South Africa are currently doing is wrong for the global game. Imagine we start seeing this at schoolboy, or we start seeing it under 20s. What's going to happen to our backlines? Like, it's out of proportion, the relationship we've got between our forwards and our backs at the moment. It's why hookers are 3 times more likely to score a try on the back of a maul than an international centre is to score a try. It is out of balance, and the South Africans are leading that drive that's pushing it in that direction.
Well, he's not happy there, and you would never know. South Africa play 8 forwards, 7 forwards, 6 forwards on the bench.
Yeah, well, look,
and it's all within the laws. I know Matt's not
correct.
happy, but it is all within the laws.
It is, and I think it's the bigger picture stuff here, and I agree with Matt on that, you know, if we see under 20s or under 18s teams or even in the club game here in Ireland, teams doing that. I know it's totally different for the All-Ireland League here in the club game. But it is ultimately, you know, player welfare is really important, and it's something that's probably cropped up a number of times over the years when the powers that be get together, the players' unions, and which is brilliant. The players have a voice in you know, this new global league that we think we'll see at international level. So they have a voice at that table now, and player welfare is something that has to be paramount in the game. And you know, it's a dilemma because you know, South Africa have done nothing wrong here, and you know, if I had that many forwards, I'd be tempted to do it as well, particularly with the 6-2 stuff. I don't think we'll see 7 forwards coming off the bench because it's too risky if you got a couple of backline injuries. But the thing about the player welfare is, and when it's cropped up, it's over the years, is people have spoken a lot about the substitutes coming on 50 minutes, you know, complete new front row. Sometimes the opposition don't have the same quality or depth, and they're trying to stay in the game, and their starting front row is really strong. They don't have the depth in the bench, so they're trying to keep their players on for 70 minutes or whatever. They have 20 minutes then against these fresh, aggressive, angry players who are coming on the field who are probably upset that they never started first time. So, of course, you use it to your advantage when you can, but I don't think there'll be any sort of changes or anything around this, but it'll be debated. And South Africa are blessed with so many talented forwards and power and physicality, but you know, you probably wouldn't like to see it happening going forward, because it does negate who'd want to be back in rugby then, you know what I mean? So it's something that may be looked at, but the 6-2s, I don't know where it'll end up, and will it ever become a situation where you have to play 3? Some people will agree with it. The stronger nations will probably disagree, you know, and say, well, this is unfair and it's within the laws and you're tinkering with the game. But again, player safety is, and the point probably I didn't emphasise it enough is, anybody who's spoken about player welfare in the last number of years, some have even wanted to not go back to the old way where you could only make changes for injuries, and that people end up being fatigued, the hits decrease, the power decreases as the game goes on. And you know, it has to be looked at. All avenues have to be looked at to make the game safer.
100%, Alan. 100% correct.
Yeah, as we say, player welfare and safety is the paramount thing. But if we move on and we took at other contenders, Matt, the other side of South Africa on Friday night at Twickenham was New Zealand. They were pretty poor. We've notice there, Scott Barrett, he, after his red card, he's cleared to play in the World Cup. They can't be as bad. Surely not, going into that Friday night game to open the World Cup against France, which, as you say, can determine many factors going on for the next 6 weeks in the World Cup.
Stu, I'm certainly Alan didn't pick that scoreline. I didn't pick that scoreline. And I didn't think New Zealand would be that bad, because New Zealand were quite superb during the championship. Now it was a truncated championship. And except for the last test against Australia in Dunedin, where they did make a number of changes to their team, they were completely dominant. Their first 20 minutes against South Africa in Christchurch was scintillating, was equal to Ireland, France, as far as entertainment, pace, precision, execution, relentlessness. They were just brilliant. So, and I would also say that, like I said before about warm-up games, these guys had their eyes on France in 14 days' time, and I wouldn't write a huge amount into it. I think we could write more into this, that South Africa were much better than they'd shown in the championship, and New Zealand are much better than they showed against South Africa. I still think New Zealand will be there or thereabouts. Now that they've got a couple of injuries, especially in their front row. Lomax in their front row is, that's a blow to them for sure. But I think we'll know a lot more after they play the French in the opening game. Again, if we're not putting too much on Bayonne, we're not putting too much on how Ireland have played against Italy and England, I think we've got to give the same to the Kiwis, who have been excellent up until this point. So let's not write them off or say that they're in real trouble. I know we'll come to England. I think England are the exception to what I've just said. I think England are in super, super deep water. They're not waving, they're drowning. But they're the exception to the rule, I think, with these games. The Kiwis just have too much class, too much power, too much skill. With any team that's got Richie Mo'unga on the board and Bud Barrett and the three Barrett brothers, you just can't say that they're no good, and Aaron Smith and so on. Now again, let's wait until that French game. The one thing I think if we come back to the South Africans that we noticed from the French game, which is going to be very interesting, because teams are learning and exploiting what they're learning from opposition. And we didn't talk about the Irish line-out, which I'd like Alan to comment on, because I think that is a point of concern, because the Irish line-out has been the best line-out in the world, but they've struggled the last few weeks, and I think teams are figuring them out. So if we say that that's true, the South Africans have been taking a lot of intercepts, and the intercepts are happening because the South African defensive line, if the field is 70 metres wide, they're compressing their defensive line to, say, 40 metres. But they are really in depth and they're coming up hard. And they're taking intercepts. But that's leaving space on the far end. So let's see where that pans out in the future. We saw Dupont on the weekend against Australia in his own 22 do a crossfield kick to his winger. So he's 15 metres from his own upright, and instead of kicking the ball in the touch, he does what was deliberate crossfield kick to his winger who was unmarked, because the Australians had done what the South Africans had done and compressed their defensive line. So again, if it comes back to what we're talking, Stu, let's not read too much into these pool games. But let's see how that's exploited, what other teams have learned is exploited going forward into these early rounds. And again, let's see how the Irish line-out responds, because it has been superb. And Quinny, I don't know if you agree with me, but I thought it creaked a little bit the last few weeks, which I was surprised at.
Quinny, do you want to, I know we're talking about overall in this preview, but Matt makes a good point there about the Irish line-out. James Ryan was speaking about it a couple of weeks ago against England, said they were actually very smart defending it, whether it was legal or not. He wasn't sure, and he was trying to speak to the referee during the game. As a back row in the line-out, what have you made of the struggles? Paul Connell won't be happy at all, but do you reckon it's a bit of Ireland being maybe a wee bit sloppy, but also the defensive maul working them out a wee bit.
Yeah, the opposition have defended against them very well.
Legally?
Yeah, well, there was a few hands in there the other night. To be fair, Samoa put a bit of pressure. I think Wayne Barnes missed some stuff, closing the gap, all that kind of stuff. So I think back to Ireland v France a couple of seasons ago over in Paris, and the issues about closing the gap, and France were very tactically very good at that, getting players in the air early, and Ireland lost the game 30 points to 23, was it? There
was Joey Carberry went to the corner, and they had 5 metre, and James Ryan lost the line. Sorry, Ireland lost the line. It wasn't necessarily James Ryan. You know,
and I remember all these missed lineouts and these things because I was obsessed with lineouts. But look, I don't think it's a major concern. I think there's been obviously different personnel, 3 different hookers for the 3 games. Rob Herring, Dan Sheehan and Tom Stewart. In all those 3 games, I wouldn't blame the hookers throwing and say it was poor. I think the timing was off, the lifting was a bit sluggish, where the ball was called in the line-out wasn't correct, and the opposition pressure was really top-notch. So you've kind of 4 elements to that there. So I think they need to speed all that stuff up a little bit. So in other words, the movement on the ground needs to be quicker, the call needs to be to the right area, and the throw needs to be a little bit more zip in the throw. Because I looked at Tom Stewart the other night in the lineouts they lost. They lost 5 lineouts in that first half. It wasn't as if his throws were really poor or undercooked or really low. I think they just could have been a little bit quicker. The movement could have been quicker for him. So it's a combination of all the above. They're a bit sloppy. I believe, knowing Paul O'Connell, that they'll probably have some different lineouts here. They probably have a different menu. And a lot of what they used were regular lineouts that they've used in the Six Nations, and last year the teams have looked at and defended them accordingly. So I think there'll be a little bit of movement, a little bit of the strategy will be a little bit different. But it does need to be better, because one lineout can lose you a test match. It's very simple. The same way as if you steal one, it can win you a test match. So Ireland, we know, launch a lot of attacks, and they've been brilliant. So it's a really important fundamental part of the game, vitally important. The line out, scrum and breakdown, well, if you've problems in either of those facets, you're struggling to win a game. So Ireland got away with it the other night. They lost 5 lineouts in that first half. They lost 3 against England, and even some of the ones they won were a little bit sloppy. So I'd be quite comfortable that Paul can, and of course the personnel when O'Connell or when O'Mahony and James Ryan come off the bench. So yeah, it's not as if the players on the field, it was their first test match. I just think they need to be sharper, and I would be confident they will be, because you know, you play South Africa, you're not coming up against 2 jumpers, not 3 jumpers. You're possibly coming up against 4 guys who could be launched in the air, given, you know, Mostert can play in the back row, Steph Toy will be in the back row. You'll be guaranteed their 2 second rows will be 6'8", 9, possibly 6'10" if Snyman starts.
And how many from the bench? Won't go there.
Yeah, but you know, it's you're going to get a lot of pressure there. So it is about that speed of movement and how quick. Once that line out starts and that hooker is ready, getting it in properly, and you know, hopefully Ireland can get that right, because it's vitally important. But again, going right back to what we said, if you're looking for a synopsis of Samoa, weather horrendous, personnel changes, maybe the players, as Matt said, knowing about being selected, protecting themselves, just that 1% maybe in your brain, not being as pumped as you need to be, and tactically making a few mistakes throughout the game. So it's done and dusted squad name now, and hopefully it's onwards and upwards to France. But you know, some of these things, I hope we're not talking about a lost line out against France, South Africa, or Scotland or New Zealand, whoever it is, when you play them.
Hopefully not. As you said, it's been such a good weapon to the Grand Slams, you know, and been so good for so long. Matt, just before we wrap up, 2 teams I want to quickly mention if we can. England, which I know you haven't been impressed with them, to say the obvious, for the last 12 months. And then Australia under Eddie Jones. If you can sort of break it down, what they've obviously lost last weekend to Fiji. Steve Borthwick saying, you know, we'll be right for Argentina. What do you make of England rugby at the moment?
Well, mate, each national team is a reflection of the structure below the national team. Irish rugby is flourishing because the structures below the national team are flourishing. Leinster and Munster. Look how Munster played the end of the season. They're fantastic. Look at the under-20s. Won the Grand Slam, made the final. Rugby below the national team is flourishing, so the national team flourishes. Every national coach is a hostage to the system below. You look at England. 3 clubs have gone bankrupt. They're under-20s, which statistically the number of players in England, they should always dominate Ireland at the age groups, and they're not. Their structures below the national team are in, the competition, the professional men's competition is in crisis. So it is and that they were playing poorly when Eddie was there, and they blamed Eddie. It's not Eddie. What is England's style of play? If we could all tell you what Ireland's style of play is, we could all describe it and say, quick ball, they're playing flat, they got forwards running, they're linking forwards and backs. What's England's style of play? Mauling and then kicking from 10 is not a style. Well, it is a style of play, but it's not a philosophy. So England are not playing to a philosophy because they don't have one. Second part is, and that shows in how their 10s are playing. Doesn't matter who they're putting at 10, they're blaming their 10. It's not the 10's fault. There's no structure of attack around the 10. There's no, we can see the structures around the Irish team, around the New Zealand team, and around the French team. We could point them out to you if we had a screen here to show everyone that's contributing here to the pod. But with I can't show you that with England. It's non-existent. So that's where they are. It's not Borthwick's ball. He's inherited an absolute dog's breakfast of an organisation, and they will not get this right during this World Cup. Unless there is some sort of, unless Argentina really stuff up, Michael Cheika will beat this team. Michael Cheika's Pumas will beat this team. Australia are the same to a lesser degree. The structures below are starting to be addressed, but they are still 8 years, maybe more away from getting it right. And their Super Rugby teams, with the exception of Brumbies, are not playing great rugby. They selected one out half. He's a good kid, and he tried well. But under 3 coaches now, under Michael Cheika, Reddy, and now under Eddie, Australia have been horrific with penalties. They gave away a crazy amount of penalties against France. Their discipline is a bit appalling. They got another yellow card the other day that cost them points. And their defensive system has been very, very questionable when they're put under pressure. And they have done that not just in the last test against France. They did it against Ireland. They did it against France last year. They've done it. They did it against Italy when they lost to Italy. They did it against New Zealand in Dunedin. They've done it for years and years and years. And this is now a culture within this side that I don't know how Eddie Jones is going to break it, because it's psychological. It's not physical. Yet, having said that, their side of the pool, they've got 2 or 3 good games in Australia. They won't get 6 in a row, but they've got 2 or 3. They've got a really good path to a semi, as does Argentina. So they could get there, but that side of the pool lacks the quality, extremely lacks the quality compared to Ireland's side of the pool. There's just no 2 ways about that.
Well, sides of the pool and different draws are another argument altogether, Matt. We'll not go into that one. That's a full pod in itself, world rankings, etc. But lads, I know it's on the fly here and you know nothing about this, but as we always do, predictions. But this is the only time I'm going to ask you, though, for the winners, because throughout the week I'm going to do it by matches. I can tell by the reaction, but you're going to get one go at this. So, Alan, I'll go to you. Who's going to win this World Cup?
Well, as I said earlier, and what I saw at the weekend, I'd say South Africa.
And Matt?
France, if I had to. And look, as I said before, France, New Zealand, South Africa, and Ireland can all win it.
So,
but if I had to pick one now, France at home, I think are going to be hard to beat.
And just piggybacking off that, where will Ireland get to?
Again, it's impossible to. They're good enough to go on if they keep. The concern is if they get any more injuries, we've a number of world-class players in there who are in great form going into this competition. They need a little bit of luck. They need players fit, healthy and available. So I don't know. We could go out in the quarterfinals. Stuart, it's so hard to pick. Like I say, if you get to a quarterfinal, it's France or New Zealand. Matt has highlighted the fact that France and New Zealand play in Pool 1, so you'll nearly know where you would prefer. Dare I say it, would it be better to play New Zealand and France? Possibly. People could argue that one out. So you're in a quarter-final situation here with, it'll be on the day, who gets it right, who wins those little battles, who gets their set piece right, gets a bounce of a ball. There's nothing, you'd be crazy to say, well, Ireland will beat New Zealand, Ireland will beat France. They not a chance you could say that. But are they capable of it? Yes. If they get past the quarter-final, I think everyone will start shaking a little bit then and saying, the pressure is off. If they get into a semi-final situation, they'll get such a lift out of it. But it's so difficult. You said we can do a whole pod on the rankings and the way this has been seeded a couple of years ago. It's a pity that it's ended up like this, but it is what it is, and I think they're pretty comfortable and confident of where they're going. If they get their game going, they'll be hard to stop Ireland.
Matt, just on that, where do you think Ireland will get to then?
Alan's summation is 100% correct. The only thing I'd add to it, this is the best prepared Irish side going to a World Cup in the history of the World Cup. They are in a great place. They have high quality players. They have beaten New Zealand in New Zealand. They have won a Grand Slam. They are in a great situation. And now I'd put in to add to that, when Australia won the World Cup, the two World Cups, even the final in 2003, which they didn't win, they were not ranked in the top two teams in the world in that going to that tournament. They built during the tournament, and they had class players, they had a coach they believed in, and they got it done in the process. Other teams dropped their bundles, they didn't. I think Ireland are in a really similar place. They're in that top four. We can all argue where they are, where they not are, and none of us could prove it with any. There's no real proof to where they are. But they are in a great shape. They're in a great place. And if they can get one crucial win in a quarterfinal, I just believe, Stu, if you win a quarterfinal, you can win the World Cup. Right? You're in it. Because it's not, and why? It's the best games I've ever seen in my life have been the semi-finals. And it's when France have beaten teams they should have beaten England, beating New Zealand, France beating Australia in '87, France beating New Zealand in '99. They're the best games I've ever witnessed. I was at two of them. I couldn't believe it. So if you can win a quarter final, that semi-final opens up for you, and then you can get to the final and win a World Cup. So that's going to be the day. And I don't need to tell you, quarterfinals have not been Ireland's friend. But every run has to change. Every bad run has an end. And this could be it. This could be it. But, this is what makes this World Cup great. It is so, so hard to give any prediction of the final four with any certainty.
Can't believe you mentioned the quarter-final stats, Matt. Let's hope Ireland change that, and this is the time. Lads, it's been a pleasure. Great to get the World Cup fever back. We'll be back next week ahead of the preview. Of course, all starts in Virgin Media 1 on the 9th of September as Italy take on Namibia. And after that, it's Ireland against Romania in the first pool game. Thanks for listening.